In this video, we'll go over features that are part of the base game, which started off as add-ons that Blizzard liked, but then eventually decided to add to the game themselves. And at number 10, we have the in-game calendar. Before Wrath of the Lich King, how people used to organize events and raids in-game was through an add-on called Group Calendar, which has a lot of the same features that the in-game calendar has today. As long as everyone in your raid had the add-on installed, you could invite everyone to groups, have people select which roles they're going to fulfill in a raid, and a lot of other features. The calendar seems like a no-brainer thing to have in the game, so it's actually quite a shock to a lot of people when they find out that it wasn't a default feature with the game's launch, and in fact was added 2 expansions into the game. And at number 9, we have the instance portals on the map. This is a rather new addition, where if you go on your map, there'll be a little icon exactly where dungeon or raid portal instances are located, and you can even click on the button in order to bring up the dungeon journal with that instance. This feature used to be provided by an add-on called Instance Portals, which literally has just the exact same icon on the map, exactly where the entrance to the raid is located. With the addition of the Blizzard one, there isn't really a reason to use the old add-on anymore, other than being able to see Instance Portals on the continent map, instead of having to specifically click on the zone in order to see where the instance is located. And at number 8, we have Auto Collect Mail, or the Collect All button. When you're collecting mail from your mailbox and you have a whole bunch of different items at once, because maybe you just canceled a bunch of auctions or sold a bunch of things, or maybe you're one of those weird people who actually have friends in game and send things to each other. Whatever the case, you can collect it all in your inventory with a single click of a button. This of course was not a default option. The original mailbox was kind of garbage, and it could only hold like 7 items in a single mail, instead of the 12 we have today. And if you wanted to send your entire bank to an alt, you'd have to individually open and collect every single item manually. That was unless you had the add-on Postal. Postal allowed you to auto-collect all the mail with a button. It also added a nice drop-down menu to send stuff to your alts easier without having to type their name in, and was basically worth installing just for the auto-collection feature, which is why Blizzard basically added the exact same button Postal used to the game in order to collect mail. And at number 7, we have graphics on screen for proc effects. On some classes, like Shamans for example, when you get a stack of Maelstrom, which allows you to cast a spell instantly at 5 stacks, you'll get a little notification on screen in the form of a little lightning bolt for each stack of Maelstrom you receive. And then it goes on to create a little image when you have all 5 of them, which is a lot bigger and more noticeable. This little feature was part of an add-on called Power Auras, which was a robust way for people to track these kinds of procs in-game without having to stare at the top right-hand corner of their screen for their buffs. Blizzard agreed that this was such a useful feature for raiding that they integrated it directly into the game for certain classes, where it's just on by default for certain abilities and talents. The default one doesn't track everything, but it does track a lot of the important ones. Power Auras isn't really a thing anymore. That's because they kinda got converted over into weak auras too, which is still definitely used for the same features, as well as a whole bunch of other things to the point where it's kind of considered a must-have add-on for raiding. And at number 6, we have Item Level. The game has always had item level on their pieces of equipment, but there wasn't an in-game item level indicator, the one which shows your average item level of your equipment. In fact, equipment didn't used to show an item level at all until patch 3.2. But during Wrath of the Lich King, there was a very popular add-on called Gearscore, which would basically add together the item level of all of your equipment, and then give you a score based on your maximum item level. And with the add-on installed, you could find someone's score by just hovering your mouse over them out in the open world. And it was an incredibly convenient way for everyone to find out who was better geared than they were, and it worked as a screening tool in raids and dungeon groups to look for people who had gear for the appropriate kind of content. Although there were a lot of controversies and problems with the add-on, people would only take people to groups if they had a certain gear score, regardless of whether they knew the content or not, and the add-on itself didn't penalize gear who had stats that were inappropriate for the class or role, or if it was only useful in PvP, nor did it consider weapon or armor type. So if you just had a whole bunch of really high item level pieces of equipment, and they weren't actually useful to you, you'd still have a really high gear score as long as you could equip them. So in order to curtail this add-on, which was actually kind of hated by a lot of the community, Blizzard added their own average item level stat, which will show you your average item level in your stat panel without having to add it all up yourself. And they also broke a lot of the parts of the Gearscore add-on itself, so that you couldn't hover over one in major cities to see their item levels, and people started to value accomplishments more than item levels, although generally they kind of went hand in hand. The in-game item level has basically completely replaced Gearscore, Although recently there has been a new system for rating players called Raider.io, which gives players a score based on accomplishments and achievements, although even this one has some problems and is generally used alongside item levels as well. And at number 5, we have threat meters. In the original game, you couldn't actually tell how much threat you had at a mob until it started attacking you, and only then because the mob was literally attacking you. So threat meters like Omen were very valuable in the early days of the game, and Omen was definitely one of the most popular threat meter add-ons, though there was more than that one. And basically all Omen did was show you exactly how much threat you had, and who was next in line in threat, etc, etc. Threat was a much bigger deal in the early days of the game, and DPS players actually used to have to watch their threat as well, because it was real easy for them to accidentally pull more threat than a tank and have a boss run for them. Whereas today, that only happens if your tank is literally dead or during skittish weeks. It wasn't until Wrath of the Lich King that players were actually able to see threat in game. And today, there's even a little number above their nameplates that tells you exactly how much threat you have. So, you don't really need a threat meter add-on at all anymore. And at number 4, we have show numbers for cooldowns, as well as showing an icon on your body when you're subjugated to a CC effect. These were features of an add-on called OmniCC, which is still a thing in-game because it puts numbers on more than just your action bars and CC durations. And the add-on Lose Control, which would give you an icon on your character whenever you were subject to a CC effect, which was usually combined with OmniCC to also show you the duration of that debuff. Lose Control and OmniCC were both incredibly useful, that Blizzard eventually added both of them into the game by default. Now, whenever you're the target of a crowd control effect, you'll get a little icon on your character to show you exactly what it is. And if you have show numbers for cooldowns turned on in your options, you also get a number on a whole bunch of your cooldowns and durations of things. And at number 3, we have Group Finder. This is an incredibly useful feature that's basically mandatory if you're going to do Mythic Plus dungeons, or to do any kind of group content across servers. That allows you to look for other people who are doing the same kind of content as you and find a group faster. Now obviously this wasn't in the game before because there wasn't cross-server group content, but when they did finally allow you to group up with people in different servers, they didn't launch that feature with the group finder we have. So instead there was an add-on called Oqueue, which functioned very similarly to how the group finder works today. There's just a whole bunch of different categories for people looking for groups, and as long as other people have the add-on, you could see those groups and post your own. Oqueue got so popular that Blizzard just straight up added it to the game as the group finder, and even made a post saying that they liked it so much and thought it was so useful, and so many devs were using it, that there was really no reason for there not to be a default version of it in the game. That didn't require people to download an add-on. And at number 2, we have Quest Trackers. The Quest Trackers got a recent update in Shadowlands, which makes them a lot more useful than they used to be. Where now, whenever you accept the quest and have it tracked, you have a little icon on the map which will show you exactly where to go in 3D space. Although in the original form of WoW, they didn't even have markers on the map, or any kind of markers at all. The only way to know how to do a quest was to read the quest text very carefully, or to look at something online if you still couldn't figure it out. In Wrath of the Lich King, there was a very popular add-on called Quest Helper, which would actually give you pins on the map on where you need to go in order to kill specific types of mobs for the quest. Or could even tell you which quest giver you need to talk to next, or any number of things in order to help you do the quest without having to read them carefully. Quest Helper was so useful that it was easily one of the most popular add-ons that people had. And people liked it so much that Blizzard eventually added a lot of its features to the game by default, where the current iteration of the default quest tracker is good enough, where you don't really need a quest add-on anymore. There definitely are some other quest add-ons out there, some that show you how to quest much more efficiently, but the default one is more than good enough where you don't really need something like Quest Helper anymore. Of course, Quest Helper made a resurgence once Classic WoW came out, and they don't have any of these convenient features in that game, which is kind of funny how widespread the add-on became again, in a version of the game that was supposed to be back before all of these conveniences were added. And at number 1, we have the extra action bars. Now, this might be a surprise to hear, but the default game did not have all of those extra action bars that you can turn on by default. The only ones you had were the single line that you started off with, the one that you can turn on top of that one, and a single action bar to the right-hand side of the screen. So if you wanted to add more abilities, you had to scroll through them or open your spellbook. But there was a very popular add-on which had a whole bunch of sub-add-ons inside of it that you could pick, called Cosmos, and specifically the SecdondBar and Sidebar options from that add-on, which literally gave you the rest of the default action bars that we have today. The bar that goes next to the above bar, and then of course the second sidebar on the right hand side that people like to use to store their mounts or consumables. Something so standard to the game seems like it should have been a default feature from the start, which is why Blizzard eventually added them by default during Vanilla WoW in a future patch, because there are just way too many abilities for some people to have to constantly scroll through a single action bar. And since Classic WoW launched with the last version of Vanilla WoW, so they already have all these action bars in the game, this is still probably a surprise to some people who are even very well versed in Classic. Alright, and that's the list. There's actually a lot more default features which started off as add-ons, so if you know of any others that I missed, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments for a potential future video just like this one. And also, did you know only 37.7% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel?